Hello and welcome to the podcast. Anna here. I am very pleased to bring this conversation with Kathryn Millhouse to you this week, the third episode in our series looking at how the people who live, breathe and work in the space of pregnancy, birth and postpartum prepare when it's their turn to have a baby. Before we kick off, I'd like to let you know that over the next 5 weeks or so, I will be running 3 sessions of my Moving Beyond Mum Guilt workshop, Finding Ease as Responsive Parents in an Under-Supportive Society. So on the 26th of August, there is a session at Port Stephens in the morning. A Friday morning, there's a creche available. About 2 weeks after that, on the 13th of September, there will be a Lake Macquarie session in the evening. And then there will also be an online session on Tuesday evening on the 27th of September. I really want this to be accessible to as many people as possible, so the online session is pay as you can within a $5 to $35 range. If that sounds of interest to you, just head to the link in the show notes, and if not, stay tuned. Enjoy this conversation with Kathryn. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Anna Asks podcast. I am your host, Anna Cusack, and today I am joined for an interview with Kathryn Millhouse. Kathryn is someone who I became aware of through her social media presence as Mother Up on Instagram. She is a fierce perinatal health advocate, and like me, she's expecting her second child later this year. So I have asked Kathryn if she would mind coming on this podcast so that we can talk about her plans, our learnings together, and share some of those bits of wisdom and gold with you. So before I ask Kathryn to introduce herself, I'd just like to acknowledge that I am here on Awabakal country and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And Kathryn is up in Brisbane, also known as Meanjin, on Turrbal country. So, Kathryn, I will hand over to you. Can you tell us a little about yourself, where you are, who you are, and why you have the drive or desire to do the work that you do?
I'm Kathryn. I am an economist. Feels like a long time ago I actually practiced. I am in my mid-30s and I had my daughter Olivia just over 3 years ago, and it was a transformative experience to say the least. I think about this regularly, that I've had all of these life experiences, these big life experiences, and I've really been smacked in the face with a lot of discrimination and the impact of the patriarchy, and no more so than having a baby. And I really felt the need to create a safe culture and environment for women to be able to talk about their needs, preferences and desires as women, and to talk about the hard stuff and not to have to glorify the motherhood experience. So that's why I created my business Mother Up 2 years ago, where I endeavour to share and guide women with access to mother-centric and balanced postpartum resources and materials to best prepare them for the postpartum period.
I often find that a lot of people come to postpartum work after having a really rough time, first time around. And I think you kind of allude to that just ever so slightly when you say that you're looking to give people balanced resources, because I think a lot of the resources given within this kind of intensive mothering, ideal mother perfect world is really kind of presented as my way or the highway kind of advice. Would you mind giving us a bit of insight into what that experience was like for you first time around when you had your daughter? Because although I too, mother in my 30s, had my daughter about 3 years ago, I know our trajectories in that early period were completely different.
I definitely had some challenges during my pregnancy mentally, but they weren't picked up on, and people in my life, when I would share my concerns about how I was feeling, it was largely absolutely, not trying to dump on anybody. People were doing their best. People would say to me, that's normal. It's normal to feel that way. You'll feel better after you have the baby. And that ended up being really detrimental to me and my health, because your postpartum mental health, like the best indicator is your pregnancy mental health and your life mental health prior to that pregnancy. So the fact that I was quite distressed with anxiety, that was life limiting during my pregnancy, it really did set me up for further mental health challenges in my postpartum. I have usually quite a black and white personality. I like to do things the right way and I like to succeed in what I do. And so I found the conflicting information that was given, even by like the same institutions, just by different people. I found that highly frustrating. I found it really challenging that there wasn't a lot of flexibility in a lot of the antenatal education about my options that I could pursue. And we know that, feeding and sleeping are they're very controversial issues that people
two
have
of the most loaded topics, aren't they?
Yeah, they're massively loaded and they're obviously massively important when you've got a new baby. That's usually all they do. And for me, I felt like I was failing at both because of my breastfeeding challenges. And, I speak at mothers groups, and I spoke at a mothers group last week, and we speak about these loaded issues. And I try to give these women confidence in following their own conviction and following what feels right and not necessarily sticking to a particular path, and the fact that it's positive to change your mind and it's positive to reassess and to take a different path. It's not always negative, and that there is a culture in motherhood that, you're dedicated to one cause or one way of doing things, and that people want to reiterate and reinforce their decision being the right way, and they can often do that through quite pressured advice or endorsement. So we talk a lot about that. And one of my mothers last week told me, oh, well, I had this great midwife who said to me, you have to enjoy your baby. Like, that's the most important thing, and everything else can just fall in line. And I really never received any great words of wisdom or support that was about me in my early postpartum. It was all around my daughter and what was best for her. And I found that really challenging because my needs and my utility and any challenges and difficulties I was facing, I felt that they were largely pushed aside, and it was something that I had to push through for the benefit of my daughter.
And you did push through and push through and push through until you pushed too hard, really.
Yeah, that's and it was, it doesn't seem like a very long time, but I didn't sleep for 4 weeks because I was so anxious when I first had my daughter, and I had a breakdown at 4 weeks postpartum. It was a long way back and a lot of healing. And, my psychiatrist said, if you would have had better support and if you would have had better guidance in pregnancy and better care at the hospital and better intermittent care when I had visits at home, it could have been a different story. And that's really why I really advocate for women to have great continuity of care and exceptional tailored support for them all the way through, but particularly in the beginning, because I stand alongside lots of women who have reached breaking point very, very early, and we've been the lucky ones. There are women who don't make it through. It is a hugely vulnerable time, and that women need to be really well supported. They need to be supported by people like you, Anna, who do the doula work. They need to be really clear with their friends and family about what they need. They need to receive good postpartum care through the hospital system or, private midwifery care, whatever it may be. All of those things are worth investing in.
Absolutely. It's not just tick a box. You've asked these 5 questions at your 6-week postnatal check and you're done. Like, there are women who are not making it to that point, and we know that the leading cause of death in the first year after birth is maternal suicide, and we know the peak period of that is actually when the baby is 8 months old, not in that early time at all. it needs to be a full spectrum approach, you know.
Absolutely. And I speak to the mothers in mothers groups and my clients about that, you know, it's not just checking on your friends in the first couple of months. It's really being a pretty constant support for them all the way through. And I would argue really for the first couple of years, because, you know, there's a lack of diagnosis in that first year, because I think mentally people just try to hang out for their kids to turn 1, and then they can be diagnosed with sort of generalized anxiety and depression the following year. But really it's something they've struggled with for a really long time. So
yeah, and there is this idea as well that at 1 they're not a baby anymore, so therefore things will get easier. But that's not necessarily the case.
Absolutely.
In terms of child development, let alone in terms of what our mental health requirements are at different points in time. So it's a really good laying the foundations, Kathryn, for the next question that I wanted to ask you, which was, considering your first experience, how are you doing or intending to do this time around differently to the first time? So in terms of pregnancy, birth and postpartum as well, what are some things that look different, and what experiences or learnings have you had that have shaped this course of action?
First of all, I am practicing what I preach, and I am formulating my own postpartum plan, and I'm sure you're doing the same. So I'm sitting down and reflecting and noting and speaking to my support people, including my husband, about how we plan for things to be different, and, you know, allocating resources accordingly. To be honest, because I was so anxious in my first pregnancy, I didn't read any baby books. I just, you know, and so I literally did no planning. I just bought the furniture I thought we needed, and I packed the hospital bags, and that was the degree of my planning. Nobody in my life was really supportive of doing any planning 3-4 years ago. So that is something I'm doing differently now. And as part of that, or everything I'll say afterwards, this all feeds into that. I'm continuing to see my psychiatrist. So I'm really quite well now, and I'm on a really low dose SSRI, and we decided to stay on that for the pregnancy. We are just going to see how I go. And, you know, as the level of water in your body and your weight changes through pregnancy, you know, that medication level might be inefficient. We might have to change that. But at the moment, I'm doing pretty well. And so I'm being monitored by a perinatal practitioner who I've been under for the last 3 years, who I really trust and who's known me for a long time. And she's known me at my most unwell. And she's been a big part of me getting emotionally and mentally ready for this pregnancy. And she also helped me a lot in the context of getting my husband, or helping me to advocate for myself with my husband to try to get him on board for the pregnancy, because he was naturally really worried about what this could do to my mental health, and the fact that he was so emotionally scarred as I was from that first experience. So, you know, he had to be convinced that it would be different, at least from a mental health perspective. So that's something that I'm really big on, that, you know, and that may be, if you have had mental health problems in the past, it may just be having that space with a counsellor or a psychologist intermittently. It might be a 4 times a year thing, or it could be monthly. I just love having that space and that investment in myself, and that ability to be able to connect with someone who knows the full picture. She's also there for me, you know, if things do become difficult. So that's a big thing I'll be doing differently. Yeah, I did experience a lot of feeding trauma, and I think I don't find a huge amount of this information out there. So this is anecdotal evidence that I've found through communicating my own story and being contacted by lots of women, as well as women who I speak to in mothers groups. I would have spoken to hundreds over the last 2 years. And feeding trauma is very real. And it is something that a lot of women do have front of mind if they do decide to have further children. There are some women who will think, okay, well, I will wait and see if the challenges are similar or as significant, and would like to give it a go, give feeding a go, but I'm not going to give myself grace because my mental health is more important than how my baby is fed. For me personally, I've decided that it's not something that I'm prepared to do. For this postpartum, I'll be exclusively formula feeding the baby. And, what comes with that is advocating for myself and my decision with my obstetrician to make sure that's well communicated on the ward at the hospital, for it to be well communicated with the midwives. I don't want to be in a position where I feel judged or I feel somebody's trying to talk me out of my decision. So there'll be some preemptive work there that I'll be doing to protect myself and to advocate myself in that context.
And I think even that you are aware to be having that advocacy, having that communicated extensively, because I find that whether women are planning to formula feed or breastfeed, that either way, there's often someone trying to talk them out of it.
Agree. Yeah, absolutely.
So to really strongly express the direction that you have chosen to take for your health and therefore the overall well-being of your family is a really massive step in itself.
And, I've got lots of friends and acquaintances and clients who have, really struggled the first time, and they've had a much better experience. And, a lot of that comes down to preemptive and guided investment in a really good lactation consultant. So a client right now, she had some great sessions with a lactation consultant, and her feeding journey is so much different now than it was with her first child. And so she's been more set up for success this time around. And I'm really happy that in her case, it is, she's been able to follow through. I think no matter how you decide to feed, I still think, and I put myself in this category as well, I still think that you need to feel like you have the agency to change your mind. So, you can have a preference and you can have a plan, but you never know how that's going to work out. So I speak to lots of women who have like feeding goals and milestones, and sometimes I think they're too long and there's too much at stake and all that sort of stuff. So I really try to go, look, just take it a day at a time and just see. You just don't want to feel like that you're constrained and that you have to reach a certain milestone in whatever decision you make.
It's also a topic that can be really presented as an either or, which it absolutely can be, but we need to remember that over the course of the majority of infants in Australia and Western countries, there's going to be the longest period of time is when they're being combination fed. And I think we don't even recognise that is a valid and sustainable option long term for some people with the right support. So really there's 3 options to be choosing from, and you can sort of shuffle back and forth between all of those at different points in time as you need to, when you have the correct follow-up and support people on your team. Perhaps that is the next question for you, Kathryn. Who is on your support team so far? So you've mentioned the psychiatrist, the perinatal health worker who you've been working with for quite some time now, your husband as well. Are there other professionals or services that you are calling on this time around, either preemptively or keeping in the back of your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm going to be doing more meal delivery options. I've actually never done that before, but that's also going to be part of my village. I'm not going to be asking for anything for the baby. It's like, please just cook us food. So that's a huge one, because I found that was just really, really hard in those early months, particularly with a toddler as well. So that's something that I'm really, really focused on sorting out. There are definitely going to be certain organisations that I'm going to keep in mind. I am going to be joining a mothers group. So I will join Mothers Connected in Brisbane, which I actually present at. It's just a fantastic group and I really feel so aligned with it. And I think it's really important that we normalise the fact that even if we work as a perinatal professional or an advocate, we need to sit alongside other women, and we also need to support ourselves. So that's something I definitely will be doing. I have a mother's helper. She's been a friend of mine for 7 years, and she's just a jack of all trades. She's amazing. She's somebody who literally helps me with my garden. She helps look after my daughter. She's an incredible organizer and facilitator, and I'm going to be relying on her for several hours a week to just come and break up the days and to help a couple of hours at a time. So that's something that, we are budgeting for. And then the key person is my mother. Like, we're very, very close, and she's someone who's been a huge support and for me during, this postpartum with my daughter. But she's going to, she's so well aligned with how I want to do things differently and so supportive. And she's also very close with my daughter. So I think she'll be great for the transition. Lastly, and critically, is now a friend, but was part of my first postpartum. She's a maternity nanny in Brisbane who worked in Sydney for many, many years. And she did some night work with us from my daughter was 4.5 weeks when she joined us. And she was critical in my recovery to enable me to switch my mind off, alongside the medication and the therapy as well, to enable me to get some structured sleep and downtime. So she will be supporting us for probably 6 to 8 weeks after the baby's born. Alongside that, I'll have my women's health physio. We'll be engaging with a lactation consultant to the extent that I want to understand how I can best support my body not to lactate, or to ensure that I don't, or to protect myself against mastitis and things like that. That's the plan so far.
One service that I believe you used in the first, after your first daughter was born, was a mother-baby unit, which might be something that listeners haven't heard of and you often don't hear of until you actually need one. Is that something that you could explain the role of to us?
Yeah, absolutely.
Please?
In Brisbane, we actually don't have a mother-baby unit which is attached to a traditional hospital or an obstetric hospital. That is in play at the Mater Hospital in Brisbane and will be up and running within the next few years. I understand in Sydney and Melbourne, it's much more of a connected process where women are more rigorously identified.
And there's one here in Newcastle too.
Great. And that, women are, transitioned at a critical time. Whereas in Brisbane, there's Belmont Private Hospital, which is a psychiatric hospital, where there's day support classes and options associated with bonding with your child and maternal mental health support in that sort of group peer context. But also they've got day sessions and just one-off sessions with psychiatrists, or you can be admitted into the unit and stay from a week until several months. I was assessed and encouraged to be admitted and also do some of the classes and groups in the event that I wasn't admitted. But I decided to stay at home and have that home support. I did weekly and fortnightly sessions with my psychiatrist. It just didn't feel like the right option for me to be away from my husband and away from my key support. So I was able to prove that I had enough support, and I was under the guidance of a really good and being monitored by a really good psychiatrist. So people, they were comfortable with my decision. No one can force you to go there per se.
So an inpatient mother-baby unit is where the mum and the baby are admitted to a room together within the hospital for that week to several months, as you described. But you went with an outpatient option instead.
I went with an outpatient option.
So you live at home, but you go into the service daily, weekly, fortnightly as needed to engage with their support and therapeutic programs.
Yes, that's right. So that is definitely an option. And, for people, the one that I'm talking about in Brisbane is a private service. The public ones are particularly overrun, but it is treated like a hospital stay. So people who don't have access to the family support or the pay, support to enable you to get sufficient sleep and to take the pressure off you to focus on your recovery, people will often go into a mother-baby unit because that's the way they can feasibly get that space and time and support to get better. What's different I've had clients and friends who have gone into mother-baby units, and what is different is that provided that you're happy with this, but the babies are taken away so you can actually have restful periods. You tend to eat together, you're given your medications together. Some people have formed lifelong friendships coming out of mother-baby units. A friend of mine who went into this particular one, she, it's the stigma and the biases that we come in with. She was like, oh, I met this woman and she lives right near us and she's so normal. You do come to realize that we are all very normal people. We've just had a traumatic thing happen to us. So, sometimes women are in there 3 times if they have 3 babies. I'm hoping that it'll be a different experience for me. And, if you're being well cared for throughout your pregnancy, and there are options that you can undertake like immediately after birth. There are very safe and effective options to undertake throughout the pregnancy. I'm doing everything to stay well, to be in the best position possible for the next postpartum, at least mentally.
Yeah, you have not skimped on the preparation at all, considering we're speaking while you're in your early to mid second trimester rather than really at the pointy end of things. It sounds like you are thinking forward an incredible amount, and probably that, given your first experience, that is something that you had to do even before you considered having another child, rather than something that you just make up as you go along.
A huge part of it, I think, is, your life has fundamentally changed the first time. You have so much less autonomy. You've been broken and rebuilt as a woman and a mother already. Those kind of big shocks to the system have already sort of come into play. And so I'm trying to support my mindset into ensuring that I'm speaking up for what I need, that I've got good boundaries in place, that I'm able to reinforce good and supportive and self-compassionate practices and thought processes. Because, I remember when my daughter was little, and going back to the feeding and sleeping comments that I made earlier, I saw her troubled sleeping and her troubled feeding, our trouble feeding diet ad, as a poor reflection on me and that I was failing. And so I think it's getting my mind into the position of, like, it's going to be hard. I will have 2 kids, and I'm working with my psychiatrist at being in a position where I've got 2 crying kids.
Yeah.
and how I deal with like the sensory stress of that, but then also how I don't internalize that as I'm failing. So
yes. Separating yourself from the situation, your worth and your capabilities as separate from the situation that you find yourself in.
Absolutely. And, my husband, we spent so much time talking about this, and he reflects back on the first year, and he just said, you just yelled at me the whole year. And I did. I mean, he was that safe emotional punching bag for me. I was able to sort of say, you need to be doing more, you need to do this. I was really deflecting like my own dissatisfaction and disappointment in myself. I've had to work on that. I've had to repair that. I've had to, we are working towards how we're able to better manage our home dynamic and our expectations of each other, and also just our expectations in general about how it's going to be like. I mean, we used to live in like a spotless, really well decorated house, and like things have fallen fast over the last 3 years. And so it's also just going, well, look, the mess will be cleaned up at some stage. Like, I just want to have, clean nappies, clean sheets, and some clean bottles, and everything else can just be done eventually.
Yeah, I often talk with clients about how really all babies need are some nappies, some arms to hold them, and something to get their milk into them.
Yeah.
Whether that's a boob or a bottle, you just need 3 things.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And just to be much more open about, I think it was Bree from Matrescence podcast. She just did a post on baby wearing and sort of just how to get through the day if you've got a contact napping baby. And like, I think for me, like, I always saw that as a flaw in my parenting, that I couldn't get her to sleep on her own for very long at all. And so also just being really like well set up with a couple of different carrier options that I'll borrow from friends, and just going, well, this is how we're going to roll, and this is fine. There's no, all that stuff about you can't give your baby too much cuddles, you can't spoil them. It's like, I'm just going to make this work for me this time in what feels right for me in regard to all of that. So
I think you've probably just just shared your little nugget of wisdom. But if there's anyone listening who is wanting their experience to be different to the last time or just better than the cultural norm of isolation and struggle of new motherhood and parenthood that we see, what little nugget of advice would you give to them? Would it be just that, to just do it the way that works for you?
I mean, that is something that I've definitely learned the hard way. But I think the thing that really set me free and the thing that really got me into this work has been formulating friendships with really accepting and encouraging women who have been great listeners and great support people. So really surrounding myself with mothers who I was able to vent with and I was able to seek support from. There's nothing worse than being in postpartum, being sleep deprived and under pressure and feeling like you have to really censor what you say, or you have to be positive because somebody won't feel that you're grateful for their baby and they'll be threatened by what you say. You really need people who you can be authentic with. And so I think that it is best to harness those relationships or rely on those relationships in pregnancy, to have those support people kind of lined up ready for you and to engage with them in whatever way it makes sense to you.
Yeah, a few people that you can lean on, laugh with, cry with, go through the whole gamut of the experience with, without judging each other.
I think that is the way that you feel most normal. And like, I receive messages from people and I sometimes worry, like, am I being too negative? And then I get messages from people going, I really appreciated that you shared all those hard stories. It made me feel validated.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, if you've got someone who's going through it at a similar time, it is just such a life support for you.
That's it. When I look back at my book, there's 10 chapters of different emotions that don't get spoken about when it comes to motherhood, and 9 of 10 of them are unpleasant ones.
Absolutely.
They're the uncomfortable ones. You know, we need to be balancing the ledger a little bit to be able to show what the reality is, because unless we do share that, people are going to be going in with the same Hollywood expectations that really set us up for failure, whether we face mental health challenges in a diagnosable sense or not. It's something that affects all of us, I think.
Absolutely. It's the matrescence process, right? And mental health covers mental well-being as well as mental illness. So it is absolutely, it's absolutely so critical.
And that's the other bit about the motherhood space, can sometimes be that unless there are those of us who are sharing the real things, it is just another wellness blogger space that feeds into patriarchy, capitalist buying stuff, and it'll fix your problems and you won't feel lonely anymore. Like, this doesn't work.
It's so funny you bring this up now, because like last week, the mothers in this particular mothers group, they're fairly early on and they're still at the sort of introductory stage with each other. And the vast majority of the conversations were focused around stuff. So it was focused on, the physical things and what's working.
Buying the thing that rocks the baby and
I couldn't help myself. I said, look, that's fine. Like, have those conversations, but let them be outweighed by the stuff that actually matters and the stuff that you think about when you wake up and go to sleep.
Because we'd love to say that, yes, this is the perfect thing that's going to make the difference to your baby's sleep, but that's not going to be the case.
Yeah. So are you going to have a home birth? Do you know what?
Yeah, so I had my first daughter at home through the public service, and this time I've got a private midwife, and the plan is at home as well.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, that's one thing that, although I know we're different paths on that, I think that's something that both of us are able to then look to postpartum much more, because neither of us are concerned about our birth. Like, we have a solid birth plan, we have faith in our birth team and can move on. Because I saw your infographic, these are the 6 things that I'm doing differently, and I think one of them was that you wrote that you are having a planned C-section this time.
Yeah, no, so that's what I'm doing the same. So I had a planned
Oh,
C-section last
okay.
time.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So I and really that came down to that I just didn't have any faith in my body and I was so
Yeah.
anxious. So
Yeah.
that's why I had that. But then I look at it in the in part of the big picture, my birth was the best part of my postpartum.
Yeah.
So I loved how predictable it was. And yeah, anyway, so there was just elements of it that it is a viable choice. And
Yeah.
although it can be I know that there's more intervention than women potentially want, and definitely more intervention that women need. I also think that we need to be respectful of those women who just want that maximum intervention because there's so many women I know who have had birth trauma or they've got other challenges. There's like, this is the best thing for me. Like,
I think for me it's that like the rate of unplanned cesarean section unacceptably high for people who wanted to have a vaginal birth.
Yeah.
But the people that want to have a planned C-section, those that are doing it based off their own information and choices and stuff as well. Like you're doing it because you know it's best for you. But I also know a whole lot of women who have had planned C-sections because their care team have given them like completely false information and said that they're going to die.
Yeah, it's an absolute jungle. It's really interesting though. Like I sort of interviewed my obstetrician. I'm choosing someone different this time. And I sort of I spent an hour there and I was like, this is what I want. This is what went wrong and blah, blah, blah. And she definitely wasn't trying to talk me out of a planned C-section, but she's like, have you ever considered a VBAC? And to be honest, I hadn't, but she was very pro VBAC and she like prides herself on doing VBACs. And that was kind of whereas in my first experience, it was like, how do you want to have your baby? And I said cesarean, planned cesarean, and she was like, fine. But there wasn't any discussion.
Yeah.
And it's only come out now, like in this pregnancy. I didn't know anything about the risk of multiple cesareans leading to having to have a hysterectomy. Like I didn't know any of that. Like nobody ever told me those risks.
And I even noticed when I read like the Royal Australian New Zealand
obstetric.
RANZCOG, when I read their things, so in their document about next birth after cesarean, they write it in terms of benefits and risks. They don't write it in terms of pros and cons. And so there are things that they can selectively leave out that might affect the decision. And we just don't know what we don't know. Hey,
there was no discussion about like, well, what sort of family size are you wanting? Because obviously like they don't recommend it. Is it over 3?
Because if you want 6 kids, it's not going to be doable.
Yeah. So there was very limited like robust discussion. It was like, I think anyway. So there's just all these things about my first time that it's like, well, that's just not good enough for me. So
yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you very, very much for coming on, sharing your story, sharing your wisdom with us. I will include all of your links and whatnot in the show notes as well. But would you mind telling our listeners the easiest way to find you online, please?
Yep. So I am my website is www.motherup.com.au and I'm on Instagram @_motherup.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Kathryn.
Thank you very much, Anna. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening. If you love this episode of Anna Asks, it would be a great help if you pop across and leave us a 5-star rating or review. This helps other parents and people to find us and join in the conversation. You can also become a sponsor of this pod for $2.99 Australian a month via the link in the show notes, or head to my website www.annacusack.com.au to grab my free postpartum preparation e-guide, check out my services, or grab my book, Mama You're Not Broken. Until next episode, bye from me, unless of course you want to come chat via socials @AnnaCusack.